Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall. Man, you're racking up the air miles, and we'll talk about that.
It's going to be nice to go home. Right after the show, we head for home.
Okay, so first, well, now you're in Ottawa, and that means you got to talk Senate.
Sure.
And you
Fair
and I
enough.
spoke.
That's the rule, right?
That's the rule.
Yeah.
That's the rule right now.
Yeah.
Pam Wallen, of course, is at the center of this, and she's a senator from your province.
Right.
How do you, first of all, do you think this has played out? Because the allegation is that we haven't basically heard the whole story about the $90,000. In your view, watching this, how's it played out?
You know, it's interesting. Money's been paid back, and in the thousands of dollars, and so, you know, obviously there was something improper that happened for that money to have been paid back. And you know, I think Canadians expect that if there are legal issues at work, then the legal system will take over, and there'll be consequences for anything like this. And if there are workplace issues to come to bear, those should as well. So if there's what I'm saying is, if there's workplace consequences for this improper use of funds, then there should be. Should it be suspension, or I guess we'll leave it up to the Senate for that. I don't have much of a comment on what the level of consequence should be, but I think it's reasonable to expect some if money's been paid back and there's obviously been an improper use of expense.
One of the speculations is what should happen to the senators, but the other, and you're as someone who holds office, I mean, this has obviously hurt the Prime Minister's office because the allegations are that they, in some way, shape, or form, were involved in some kind of deal. Just from your point of view, does it matter now what happens to the three senators, or has this scandal, this controversy, hurt everybody involved, from the Prime Minister on down?
I don't know. I think it's a bit early to tell, and leave it up to the pundits and pollsters. I guess are weighing in on a daily basis. It's certainly taken up a lot of oxygen. We're here for meetings with ministers and the Prime Minister, and
is that right?
And yeah, I mean. The meetings went well. Ministers were focused, but in terms of the overall buzz in the city, and for example, what we're talking about, not just here, but all across the media, understandably so. It's a huge story, and I just don't know how long it lasts. I guess that remains to be seen.
Pam, well, how's it playing out in your province? Because she was someone who was obviously incredibly well known. How's it playing out there? Sympathy with her, sympathy against the Senate? What's your view?
It's probably a mix. I don't know. It's really tough to gauge.
You're going right down the middle of it. You're just going to drive down the middle.
In this case, it's true. I think there's a growing frustration with the Senate. As you know, we once advocated Senate reform. Long before the Senate scandal, we moved our position to abolition, and that's where it stands today. But I think increasingly, as a result of this, there's a bit of frustration with the institution. Because we have, whatever happens with this motion, they're all appointed. We're going to have appointed senators holding other appointed senators accountable. The nice thing about other parliamentary institutions is that the voters hold the politicians accountable. And even for those who say, well, we should elect senators, you'd only elect them once, so they wouldn't face that accountability subsequently.
You have spoken a lot about the abolition of the Senate, and it's a position that some say, look, it may not be popular in some parts of the country, but look at already the Supreme Court challenge that Quebec will stand against the government on this if they want to go to the Supreme Court for even reform. We're not even talking about abolishment. In other words, as soon as you talk about the Senate, you may crack open that old Pandora's box of constitutional debate, which you never know where that's going to end up. Is that the problem here? You want abolition, but you threaten to awaken some pretty old ghosts.
Well, we've said we've moved in. The other reason to move to abolition as a position is we think it's marginally easier to do than reforming, but still very difficult, even if it's 750. So you're absolutely right. I think there'll be a hesitation to get into the Constitution unless there's a clear understanding by participants that it's limited in scope to the Senate.
And maybe this is a watershed moment, that maybe this crisis tips people over?
I think it might be. I think there might be more interest in a referendum. In our province, this legislative session in the fall, we'll be repealing our own elected Senate Act, and we'll be moving a motion to abolish it. And I think our opposition are going to vote for us. It'd probably be the first such motion, and maybe it won't happen in other places, but it just might as a result of all of this.
All right, so keep your eye on Saskatchewan on that in terms of Senate, the movement to abolish Senate. You want to talk about trade or just all Senate all the time? All right.
Okay, let's talk a bit of trade.
But the CETA deal, the free trade deal with the EU, will have big impact on Saskatchewan? How will it affect your province?
A couple of ways. Agriculture is a big part of the deal. It doesn't. We don't now have free trade with the European Union in agriculture, but freer trade. And so the estimate's about 1.3 billion in additional agriculture sales to Europe. Saskatchewan has 40% of Canada's arable acres, second largest beef herd. We've got pork. We've got producers. We've got bison. Ranchers, and so we're going to disproportionately benefit. Here's another benefit that's not as well known. There's something in Canada called NROP, the non-resident ownership provisions on uranium mining. So it restricts foreign investment in uranium mining, so that uranium companies from far away, or from other countries, have to have a majority Canadian partner. We asked the federal government to include it in the EU. They've done that. It's removed. So a Rio Tinto or the state-owned company in France, Areva, can now move in with an investment. We think it's worth about $2 billion.
And now, you guys have had some shipments recently of your
we did first shipment
that's
ever
right,
to China.
To China.
The Prime Minister concluded an NCA, nuclear cooperation agreement with China, the most robust civilian nuclear market in the world. And I tweeted out a picture from Shanghai Port, first Saskatchewan uranium ever. That could be about $3 billion in sales. And here's an industry, Evan, that employs, in terms of those high-paying mining jobs, 40% or so, more than 40% of the jobs at Cameco, the uranium company, are First Nations and Métis.
All right, and we'll talk about that. Today you were talking to some ministers about pipelines and pushing that west-east pipeline. And what's your take on the concerns, even on that pipeline, safety concerns about something that would go from west to east through Ontario and Quebec?
We should take them seriously. We should be careful to take whatever steps we can to ensure the sustainability of the. It's a reversal, so you know it's not it's not very intrusive.
There.
Right,
That's
right. But still, and we also need to get all the consultations right. But it's very important. Actually, there will be Saskatchewan oil in that pipeline if it's reversed. Unlike the other ones.
How close is it? I mean, are we about a year away?
Yeah, I'd say, and I think so far there's been provincial, fairly positive considerations. I think Ontario's been constructive. I think Quebec has been constructive, and credit Premiers Alward and Redford for kind of really demonstrating leadership on this one.
And we'll see what happens in Quebec. Of course, that could be where this is critical there. Minister Kenny and labor shortages, you spoke about that. You and I both know that despite the fact that there's skill shortages in some parts of the country, there's high unemployment in other parts of the country. And the temporary foreign workers program has been controversial, to say the least. How do you get skilled workers to the places they're needed in your province? What did you tell the minister?
That is a great question. It's a combination of things. First of all, in our province, we need to ensure that we're training First Nations people whose unemployment rate's higher than the overall rate for the province. That's our first source for the future in terms of skilled labor, and we're doing that with strategic investments and increased apprenticeship training and increased adult basic education. But the other sources are other parts of Canada for skilled labor, and then internationally.
But I mean, what if somebody says, why is Premier Wall going to Ireland to bring Irish guys here when we have unemployment all across the country?
I ask the same thing. It's a strange thing to be flying over an area of our country that has 10%, 11% structural unemployment with 250 jobs in hand, good jobs, engineering, construction jobs, professional jobs. And we have asked for some changes to EI where we think there's some inherent disincentives to the program. And my very good friend Robert Giz, who and I understand his position, and other Atlantic premiers are opposed to those. And I actually understand where they're coming from. They don't want to. They don't want to lose more people.
They don't want to lose people, and they have seasonal markets.
And they face the hollowing out.
Right,
and so, but you know, it's the mobility piece is still very important for us, because our first source for new jobs anywhere in the country, west or east or middle, should be other Canadians.
All right, I got to leave it there with Premier Brad Wall, who's been traveling. He's been to Singapore. You've been to where? Manila?
Manila and Japan.
Japan and then Toronto.
That's right.
All these exotic places.
But 1 in 6 Japanese beers brewed with Saskatchewan barley, Evan. It's a very important market.
That is
there you go,
right.
Sapporo and Asahi.
Right, and I'm sure you investigated that.
Well, there was no testing.
There was no testing of the product. Brad Wall, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, there was testing.